Here we go. It's our weekly WTOP huddle. We've got the gang together. Rob Woodford, Dave Preston, Chris Cheon, George Wallace, talking some NFL, talking some football, because that's what carries us through each and every week. And this week, unlike last week, we have a Washington football team now trying to bounce back after a loss. So we'll begin with that in our conversation today. And it doesn't surprise me that they lost game 2 against the Cardinals, not because it was the Cardinals, but because I think it's clear that it's a young team in a rebuilding year, that this ride with the Washington football team is not going to be smooth. In some ways, I heard Ron Rivera make the comment about, as we've noticed, Dwayne Haskins has been a better second-half quarterback in each week against the Eagles and Cardinals. And it's part of being a young quarterback. There's that anxiousness he mentioned in the first half of games. Once he settles down, things get better for Dwayne Haskins. Things get better for the Washington football team. I think because it is a young team, especially on offense, that is the kind of season that we're going to ride with. And there are going to be moments like the Eagles game where the defense is able to come up with the takeaways and the 8 sacks and change the game like they did against the Eagles. There'll be games like the Cardinals where you're not going to be able to rely on that. So from that sense, just fasten your seatbelts and hang on. This is going to be a ride with this Washington football team, and I don't mean that in a negative way. We'll open it up to the floor. We'll start with you, Dave Preston. Your thoughts on that?
They weren't as good as they were in the win over Philadelphia, and they weren't as bad as they were in their loss to Arizona. This is a young team that's going to have a lot of growing pains. It's going to take a while for Coach Ron Rivera to come up with the 53 that he wants on this roster. Again, there's no preseason, so you almost have to look at these first couple of games. He's seeing some new players that he's chosen for a system they've not played in roles that they've yet to accustom themselves to. A couple of red flags from Sunday. One, the inability to move the football on third down in the first half. I think they were 1 for 7 at moving the chains. That's not ideal. Also, they made a lot of mistakes and some penalties that hurt them. That there was that early sequence where they had the block to the back on the kickoff, the hold on the punt, and then an offensive hold inside the red zone that led to the Cardinals' first touchdown. It's tough enough to go up against the Kyler Murrays when you don't make those mental mistakes, even more so when you're fumbling, when you're making those penalties that give them an even shorter field to execute on. But it's only 2 weeks. Very impressed with the play of a guy like Bostic, 7 tackles and a sack. The other guy, the linebacker, who had 15 tackles, played as well. So, I mean, you've got possibilities on this team, and it's going to be, as Dave said, an interesting ride. Let's see where it goes from here.
Yeah, and they had a chance to win that game, and I think that should be pointed out as well. They still played through. Rob, we'll go to you. Your thoughts after 2 weeks with this Washington football team?
I think you have to appreciate, in order to appreciate where they are, you have to remember where they've been. I mean, this is a team that was 3-13 last year. Whether they were facing good teams or bad teams, or it didn't matter, they usually lost. What I think they've proven through 2 weeks so far is that, number one, they're going to be competitive even if they're not good yet, and that's an improvement. And I think the second thing is being able to beat the bad teams, or being able to take advantage of matchups that are in your favor, and all of that is a steady progression to where they want to go. So if you go on the road against Arizona and lose, I feel like a lot of people are going to do that this year. And the fact that you were able to even make it, get within shouting distance of Arizona there in the second half was promising. But I mean, it's a lot to ask a team that's that young, that has so many new pieces in place, to be competitive and also win some of these really difficult games. They've got a pretty tough schedule. I mean, they're going to Cleveland this week, then Baltimore comes here. I mean, if they hadn't won that Philly game, they might be staring at 0-4.
Yeah, no, you make your great. I mean, and we're not using young it's a reality with this team, and
right.
and it doesn't matter what sport you're talking about. The veterans rule the day.
Right, and nobody wants to hear this. So the team doesn't want to say it, and fans don't want to hear it. But 2020 is really just a season for them to really set themselves up for 2021, 2022, 2023. This season is basically just it's basically an extended
launching pad.
Yeah, it's basically an extended preseason for these young players to see who's going to be here in the long term, and who they're going to be able to move forward with when they if they are become a winning team.
Yeah, but again, that game could have been 43-3 in the old days,
And under Jay Gruden, it would have been.
yeah, right. So it's that's a progress. But
Yeah.
I think what we have to say is, okay, they're competitive, and that says a lot about, again, how they play for this coach, their belief in each other, and we'll continue with the conversation about where this Washington football team is after 2 weeks. You know, George, I thought the head coach admitting that, look, no OTAs, no preseason. He has to be careful with how much he advances this team so he doesn't overload them, overwhelm them. And people might say, well, wait a minute, they're pro athletes, but it was a different off season. And again, it gets back to it's a lot for young players to take in. And again, I talked about last week, it's some of these players, when I talk about young players, not just rookies, it's anybody making the transition from first to second year, second to third year.
Yeah, and it's and for a head coach, I can't imagine. He said it yesterday that it's how hard it is because they have to catch themselves, the coaching staff, because you want to win the game, as he said, but you also want to understand where you're going. I thought it's interesting. He said they may not even have full grasp on this offense until next year. So that's kind of what they're dealing with. You know, that's a lot to admit, basically, that this year, who knows what they're going to get. I mean, and look at the inexperience they have in running back for one, wide receiver, just a bunch of second-year guys. Yes, tight end's a veteran, and Dwayne Haskins with 9 career starts. So it's definitely going to be a work in progress. That's why we've talked about a number of times how this defense is going to have to carry this team early on. And this team is not even close to good enough to make mistakes. And then to make mistakes, you're not going to be able to overcome them. So you're not going to be able to come back. So they make mistakes like they did the other day. You're not good enough to overcome those yet. But for me, you know, I get where Dwayne Haskins is, and I know there's going to be a lot of talk on how long do you give Dwayne Haskins? Okay, he's 9 starts. But for me, I want to see him make plays. I want to see like some of these other quarterbacks that are out there, and they make plays. And I think that's the kind of thing that Ron Rivera is going to challenge Dwayne to do. When you don't have the talent necessarily around you, let's start make some plays like some of these other quarterbacks are doing. You make the plays. You make guys better. You make plays to try and set up your team to win. So I know that's just going to be one of the things we look for this year. But you know, to hear a coach say, "Look, you may not have a full grasp of this offense till next year," is telling.
All right, Chi, bring us home and put an exclamation mark on this portion of the conversation.
Yeah, just as far as Dwayne is concerned, making plays, I mean, George, I don't know that – what do we expect him to do as far as making the plays? I mean, this is not a major scrambler. He can't really get 10, 12 yards consistently with his legs like we've seen Joe Burrow do, like we see Lamar Jackson do on a consistent basis. So, I mean, he doesn't get well protected either. So I just think this offense is going to be a struggle. Terry McLaurin, however – I mean, he could be top 10 potentially at this point, talent-wise. He is just an outstanding player, somebody to build on with this team. One thing that was discouraging I heard in the second half, commentator calling the game, I forget exactly who it was, who said the Washington football team.
That's who it was, Dick Stockton, and he called them that.
He said it a couple times. Yeah.
Oh, really? Well, I'm not a phone. He said they look gassed. They look tired. And now they're going up against a top 5 offensive line with the Cleveland Browns, who we just saw them against the Bengals push that front 7 of the Bengals around. And I'm afraid that could potentially happen this week. Hopefully they get their conditioning right and these young guys that, you know, bring it, because I'm a little worried about this Browns match. You know, Washington is a 7-point dog coming into this week. And I don't know. The Browns, could they be for real? We'll see. They looked pretty good last Thursday night.
And actually, real quick, to piggyback on something Chris was saying, and this may be a conversation that we have in a future session here, but, you know, you look at who the top quarterbacks are in the league. They're all dual threat. They're all guys who can beat you from the pocket. They're all guys that can get outside and create something when something's not there. And I mean, Dwayne Haskins may be in the mold of a quarterback that harkens to a day maybe 10 years ago. Maybe he's a man out of his time. That's something that maybe we should watch and maybe be ready for, if in a couple of years you see where the quarterback position is going and what his skill set is in particular.
Yeah, but that's I think you make a great point. That's a long-term discussion. At this point, he is a guy you have to stay with and develop and that.
You
And,
earned a first round pick on him. You have to at least give him through his contract. I mean, these contracts are 4 years now for these first round picks with an option for a fifth year. So you got to give him at least the 4.
Right. And again, I'm encouraged. I said this before about he's he gets better as games go on, but he's got to play all 4 quarters, not just the second half. But that to me is encouragement. And I think he also has done all the right things from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah.
From making that transition from rookie to I'm going to be given the reins of this offense. I need to act like a leader in so many ways. So that's
he took it seriously this offseason. I'm not even necessarily advocating for them to move on from him or saying that he can't do the job. He's in an impossible situation. I mean, there was a comparison between what he has here and what Kyler has in Arizona, and they've boldly moved in a very decisive direction, whereas Washington kind of dragged their feet about the Jay Gruden decision, and kind of it put their quarterback behind the 8 ball. So for reasons that aren't necessarily Haskins, he may not be allowed to succeed here. So
where have we heard that before?
That's right. But that's a long-term discussion. In the now, we have to give him an opportunity to do what he does.
Yeah, at least he's got to get through the 3rd week or so no, he's got to have that. Yeah. Dave, you want to say something?
Yeah, the Redskins have had 4 different starting quarterbacks in week
the Washington football team.
The Washington football, they were the R word last year. But the Washington football team has had 4 different starting quarterbacks in week 1 the last 4 years. And I think that this team needs to find out, they have to go all in on determining if Dwayne Haskins is the guy for 2021 and 2022, even if it's going to even if they win 5 games as opposed to 6 or 7 this year by not throwing in, one of the backups, and they need to have a starting quarterback back-to-back seasons for the first time in a while.
Right. If
this franchise is going to want to improve.
And I don't know if this analogy works, but maybe I'm showing my time in the NBA with this, but once upon a time we didn't think the 3-pointer would be as much as it is. It's a part of the game now. It's not a big man's game, and that brings the point is, I think, Rob, you were talking about, and we've all discussed that the role of the quarterbacks changed. When we talked about that, mobile playmaking quarterback, you thought that was more of the specialty and not the norm. And now it has
like a gimmick for a long time.
Right. No. And while the 3-point, again, the 3-point shot once upon a time, now I'm really dating myself, was just meant to be at the end of a shot clock out of desperation. Now it's a part of the offense. And, I think maybe we're seeing, Chris, I'll get you to comment on this because you focus so much on the Ravens. I mean, Lamar Jackson's development, because the knock has always been on a mobile quarterback. They'll end up getting killed. The NFL, you just can't do that. But he looks like he has the perfect balance because he's more than a mobile quarterback. As I've watched in the first 2 weeks, the way he makes reads and his throwing ability, you can understand why the Ravens have won 14 straight regular season games.
Yeah, well said, Dave. And I just would add that it just helps to have a top 5 offensive line like Baltimore does, so they can have designed runs where, the injuries really come a lot of times. And there has been moments with Dwayne, I see this. He gets rushers coming from his blind side, crushing him. I mean, Lamar, you just don't really see that happen. When he's taking off and running, it's for positive yards, and he's able to put himself in a spot where he's not like getting crushed and putting himself where he can get injured. Now, one play can sometimes, there was a play in their week 1 win against the Browns where he got hit late, and I was kind of like, uh-oh, Lamar, like, are you all right? But overall, I think he puts himself in a good spot to not get hurt every game. And so I'd like to see the Washington football team left side protect Dwayne a little bit better, but I mean, there's no real part of this team outside of the pass rush that you feel really that confident about outside of McLaurin, as I mentioned too.
You hope to get Sadiq Charles back too, along that offensive line, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. The lineman drafted, of course, out of LSU, so they expect big things out of him along that line. But he's been injured up in the camp, and then Sheriff goes down, so it's not going to get any easier immediately. But hopefully Sadiq comes along in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, although there was good news on Brandon Sheriff. If a sprained knee can be good news, it's only going to be a few weeks. But the good thing is we're talking about the first place Washington football team. They're tied for first place in the NFC East with a 1-1 record. And I'm still not sure what happened in that Cowboys-Falcons game. The Giants injuries, Saquon Barkley goes out. The Eagles, it proves that in the NFL, if your offensive line is banged up, you're really going to have a lot of trouble. And I think that's shown in the first 2 weeks for the Eagles. So, guys, your thoughts on that after all this anxiety, the Washington football team might be in the right division for a young team.
Last year, the NFC East won, I think, 24 games between the four teams. So, I mean, the division is ripe for their taking when the average record is 6-10. You've got the Giants in a major rebuild. The Eagles are a lot worse than we thought they'd be. I think a lot of us thought that the Eagles would win 10, maybe 11 games this year. Dallas is all about drama. New head coach, rinse and repeat, do what you need to do. They're a very bad Falcons team away from being 0-2. So, hey, you know what? As long as you're in it, you can still win it. And the Burgundy and Gold are still in position. Losing teams have won divisions before in the last decade, especially with now 4 teams in each division. I think we saw the Seahawks. We saw the Carolina Panthers under Ron Rivera.
Ron Rivera's done it at least a couple of times.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the possibilities are there for this team. And as long as the rest of your division is absolute compost, you've got a shot to do well. A couple other things around the league. Dan Quinn, how long does he stay as head coach with the Falcons? And how much of a paper tiger are the Bears?
And by the way, good use of the word compost in a podcast. I'll give you, if there's an award for that. Any other thoughts?
And if there was anybody that was going to use that word, it was him.
I haven't heard compost in a while, which probably is a good thing. Any other thoughts on the NFC East, speaking of which?
I mean, he's right. It's probably going to come down to a team that is probably closest to 7-9 is probably going to win this division. I've never had any faith in Dallas. I said this in my NFL preview. I mean, they're basically the same team that they were with the previous. They hired a coach who's the same guy as the guy they fired. So, I mean, they're not going to be really any better. Philadelphia, the offensive line, I thought that was going to be the reason that was going to hold them back. I picked them to go 9-7. I don't even know if they're going to do that because I think we're finally at the point where it's time to start asking whether Carson Wentz is the guy that was the MVP front runner in 2017, or is he this guy who's been struggling now for the better part of, 2 going on 3 seasons now. So I think that there are problems run a lot deeper than just we're banged up on the offensive line. So, I mean, this is a wide open situation for Washington. I mean, basically, I picked them to go 6-10. If that gets them at least in the conversation for the division. Oddly.
Yeah. One more win, they get the division. They get that 7th win, they might win the division. But the Browns next, and it was obviously a different Browns team facing a different opponent than they won. The Browns, of course, played the Ravens in week 1. The big concern you guys have for the Washington football team against the Browns coming up. You already mentioned it. Gee, you think the defensive line for the Washington football team will be challenged?
I think the offensive line of the Browns is nasty. They can move the pile for guys like Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, arguably the best backfield tandem in the NFL. And they just got to make – what I think Washington needs to do is blitz like crazy, make Baker Mayfield make mistakes and throw interceptions. That's how you stay in this game. They're going to run, but make Baker make the mistakes. That's how you stay in it.
Yeah, he's right. And I think that's, you're getting a different quarterback this week than Kyler Murray, so you should be able to put pressure on him. And if they do force him into things, Troy Apke in that back end, look, you showed off in camp and you got the coaches to keep you, and you cut a free agent that you signed, but you better start playing well in that back end of that secondary. So if they do force Mayfield into mistakes, you have to be ready to cover it. And they guys do have a guy named Odell Beckham. Don't forget about him at a wideout. But I think up front, I think you're right, Chi, as far as the offensive line, that's going to be the key matchup because Chubb is a beast. Man, I just love he can play and run the football. So they should have their hands full up front. But look, that's what you want, right? That's the strong suit of your team, that defensive front 7 right now. That's what you want going up against their best.
Game's always won on the line of scrimmage, as they say. Rob, Dave, anything else about this week against the Browns?
I think offensively, the Burgundy and Gold need to come out with a bit more of a sense of purpose, sense of urgency, and maybe a sense of calm. Coach Ron Rivera is saying that Dwayne Haskins was a little hyped up, and maybe that's why they're starting slow. They need to make positive plays. They need to make extended drives in the first half. They were able to recover from a slow start against Philadelphia. They weren't able to do so against a team with a lot more firepower like Arizona. Cleveland, I think, is a little more closer to Arizona as far as offensive weapons and a team that's doing the right things when they've got the football than, say, Philadelphia. A lot of pressure on the Washington football team's offense to start strong this Sunday.
I don't know how you do that with Myles Garrett going up against a beat-up offensive line like that. I just think that the Browns front is going to wreak havoc on that banged-up offensive line. Haskins has shown that he's not quite ready to overcome those sorts of obstacles yet. And I just think that's going to be a really, really tough matchup for them, given Sheriff being out and a lot of the questions that they have along the left side of the line. So I don't really see them winning this game unless Baker Mayfield has a complete meltdown and throws 4 interceptions and they return like half of them for touchdowns.
Yeah, not to oversimplify a game that we like to analyze and break down, but I've often said that a team only goes as long as its offensive line stays healthy, if it's a good offensive line. All right, they tell me a few people make wagers every now and then on football games. Chi, I know you're smiling, licking your chops. What's your pick of the week in that department for people of the sophistication that you have that can make a wager on a game?
All right, so we're going to be going with the Thursday night game here. We're going to give you a nice early one. The Miami Dolphins +3 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They played 2 playoff teams consecutively, the Patriots and the Bills. I think their offense and just personnel in general is better than Jacksonville. I just think giving the Dolphins 3 points here against the Jacksonville team that got kind of beat up by the Tennessee Titans this past week is favorable, and I like it. I'm locking in the Dolphins.
Guys, any other final thoughts and shots as we close up this WTOP huddle?
At 2:00 this past Sunday, I looked at all the scores and was very thankful that I don't gamble.
And speaking of Monday night, the other night, the Raiders, Rob, the new stadium, Derek Carr reminds us he's still a very good quarterback.
You know what? And he said before the season, like he just wants to he wants to shut a lot of people up. He wants to prove people wrong. And I mean, a performance like last night, outshining Drew Brees in a game that I didn't think they were going to win, to do it the way they did it. And by the way, found Darren Waller a few times, who I don't know if people know, he's from Landover. He was born in Landover, and he's I believe the great grandson of Fats Waller. So how about that? Has a big 12 catch touchdown performance, over 100 yards, all to christen that new stadium in Las Vegas. So looks really good. A lot of people are calling it the Death Roomba. Looks good on the inside. I don't know about the outside.
Well, $1 billion can buy you a lot still, even in Las Vegas. There it is. George Wallace somewhere. Of course, Dave Preston, Chris Gian, Rob Woodford. That is our WTOP huddle.
Break.